Science fiction can feel intimidating because people imagine dense jargon, huge timelines, or homework-level concepts. This guide is built for beginners who want a clean first step and a clear next step. You will get 6 gateway books that sell well in standard editions and are easy to find in print, ebook, and audio. We will match each pick to a beginner type, then flag common avoid first traps that make new readers quit. Nothing here requires prior genre knowledge, and nothing depends on knowing famous franchises. If you remember one rule, start with the reading experience you want, not the most famous title you have heard of. A first sci-fi book should feel like a good story first, and an interesting idea second. Along the way, I will point out what each book quietly trains in you, like comfort with future settings, comfort with big ideas, or comfort with unusual tone. That training is the real reason gateway books matter. By the end, you will have one low-pressure entry to try this week, plus a small ladder to climb when you are ready. You can also reuse this list as a reset whenever you get stuck, because the picks cover different moods, different lengths, and different levels of concept density. Most beginners fall into one of 3 lanes. Lane 1 is story first. You want momentum, clear goals, and a page-turning feeling, with the science staying in the background. Lane 2 is humor and voice. You want sci-fi that feels light on the surface, with clever ideas underneath so you never feel lost. Lane 3 is idea first. You are curious about big questions, but you still want short chapters, familiar settings, and clean sentences. Choosing your lane matters because sci-fi is not one difficulty level. Some books are built like thrillers, some are built like comedies, some are built like thought experiments. When people say they do not like sci-fi, they usually started with the wrong lane, or they started with a book that demanded patience before it offered joy. Use the next sections like a menu. Pick one book that fits your lane. Read it without pressure. Then decide if you want to stay in that lane or switch to a new one. It is completely normal to move lanes over time. Many readers begin with story first, then later discover they enjoy idea first, once they trust the genre. Your first win is not finishing a hardest classic. Your first win is finding a version of sci-fi that feels natural to you. Ender's Game Orson Scott Card. A fast, competitive coming-of-age sci-fi that reads like a tense training story in a controlled futuristic setting, with clear chapters and very little technical clutter. This is one of the cleanest bridges from popular fiction into science fiction, because the writing stays direct and the stakes stay personal. You do not need to understand military terms to follow it. The book is also a good test for your tolerance for strategy scenes, because it uses problem-solving as the engine of tension. If you like books where the main pleasure is watching a smart mind adapt under pressure, this will land. If you prefer gentle atmosphere over competition, you may want to start with The Martian instead. As part of the Ender saga, this first volume can be read as a complete experience, and you do not need to commit beyond it. What it teaches you about sci-fi is how a future backdrop can sharpen a familiar genre shape, in this case the training arc, without requiring long explanations. A practical tip is to read the first 2 chapters as a trial. If you feel pulled forward, you are in the right lane. If you feel tense or cold, switch lanes without guilt. After you finish, you can either continue the saga later or use it as a launch point into other problem-solving focused sci-fi. The Martian Andy Weir. A practical, upbeat survival story told with a problem-solving tone, set in a near-future space mission where the science feels like clever tools rather than intimidating theory. This is often the safest first sci-fi book for adults because the voice is plain, the chapters are short, and every step feels anchored in real-world logic. Even when the book mentions chemistry or engineering, it usually explains the point in everyday terms, so you can keep moving. If you enjoy competence-driven stories, like heists where planning matters, or mysteries where clues stack cleanly, this is your lane. It also sells extremely well across formats, so it is easy to find a version that matches your habits, including audiobook. The Martian is not part of a required series, so you get a full payoff in one volume. What it teaches you about the genre is that sci-fi can be optimistic and funny without losing tension, and that big settings can still feel intimate when the viewpoint stays grounded. If you want to level up after this, you can move into Old Man's War for a wider scale, or into Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep for a more philosophical mood. If you only read one chapter, you will still understand the tone, which makes it a low-risk experiment. The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. Douglas Adams. A witty, absurd comedy that uses outer space as a playground for ideas and jokes, moving through a broad imaginative setting with a conversational, playful reading experience. For beginners, this works because it removes the pressure to understand every detail. You are not meant to diagram the world, you are meant to enjoy the voice, the timing, and the way sci-fi concepts get turned into punchlines. If you bounced off serious classics, this can reset your relationship with the genre. The chapters are bite-sized and the language is simple, which makes it easy to read in short sessions. It is also the start of a larger series, but you can treat this first book as a complete sample and stop there. What it teaches you about sci-fi is that the genre can be a tool for satire, not just for prediction. A fun beginner fact is that the book became a cultural reference point in its own right, and many later sci-fi comedies borrow its casual, matter-of-fact style. If you finish and want more humor, you can continue the series later. If you want the same sense of wonder with a more grounded tone, shift next to The Time Machine. Old Man's War, John Scalzi. A clean, modern space military adventure with a straightforward voice, set in a wider future conflict that still reads like accessible commercial fiction rather than dense lore. This is a good second step if you liked the momentum of Ender's Game or The Martian and want something that feels bigger in scope. Scalzi writes with short lines and clear scene goals, so you rarely feel lost. The book also has a helpful beginner feature. It explains unfamiliar elements through immediate context instead of long background chapters. Old Man's War begins a series, but the first volume delivers a satisfying arc on its own, so you can stop without frustration. What it teaches you about sci-fi is how a far future setting can host classic adventure beats while still exploring questions about identity, bodies, and institutions. If you prefer quieter, more reflective stories, you may find the tone too brisk, and you might choose Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep instead. If you want a historical anchor for the genre after this, The Time Machine is a great palate cleanser because it shows how these big future ideas started. Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep? Philip K. Dick, a short, moody classic that feels like a philosophical puzzle, set in a damaged near-future cityscape where the atmosphere matters as much as the events on the page. This is a strong beginner choice if you want sci-fi that is more about questions than about gadgets. The sentences are not hard, but the book asks you to sit with ambiguity, so it rewards slow reading. It is also the source material behind the Blade Runner name, which can help some readers picture the mood, but you do not need any film knowledge. Because it is relatively brief, it is a safe way to test classic sci-fi without committing to a huge tome. It is not part of a required reading sequence for beginners. What it teaches you about the genre is that sci-fi can be literary without being inaccessible, and that a speculative setting can be used to study empathy, identity, and social values. A practical approach is to read a chapter, then pause and restate the central question in your own words. That keeps the book clear without turning it into homework. If you finish and want an even older foundation classic with a clear premise, The Time Machine pairs well, because it is also short and idea-driven. The Time Machine H.G. Wells. A compact early classic with a clear storybook-style voice, set around a single speculative device that opens a wide view of time and society without technical explanation. For beginners, this is one of the best ways to see what the genre has always been doing. You get a clean premise, a fast pace, and a strong sense of wonder in a short package. Because it was written long ago, the language can feel old-fashioned, but the sentences are generally simple, and the book is brief enough to carry you through. This is also a great choice if you want to build cultural literacy, since so many later sci-fi stories borrow from this basic idea. It is a standalone, so you do not need to track a series. What it teaches you about sci-fi is that the core thrill is not technology itself, but perspective. A beginner-friendly tip is to treat unfamiliar phrasing like you would in a classic fairy tale, focusing on the meaning rather than the exact modern wording. After this, you can choose your modern lane. If you want realism, go to The Martian. If you want humor, go to The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. If you want strategy, go to Ender's Game. Now that you have 6 starters, here is how to choose the best one for your week. If you are returning to reading after a break, prioritize low-friction momentum. That usually means The Martian or Ender's Game because both make progress feel easy. If you read in small bursts, choose the book with the most natural stopping points. The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy works well here because the chapters are small and the tone stays light. If you want a short test run before you commit to the genre, choose Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep or The Time Machine. Both are compact, and both show you what sci-fi can do beyond action. If you want a modern series feel without heavy lore, Old Man's War is the best bridge because it reads like contemporary commercial fiction. A useful beginner trick is to keep your first choice narrow. Read one book, then decide if you want the same mode again or a different mode. Repetition builds confidence. Variety builds taste. Either path is fine as long as you avoid the common trap of starting with the hardest book in the bookstore because it feels important. Avoid first does not mean avoid forever. It means avoid as your very first step, when you are still building the basic reading muscles for the genre. The most common beginner mistake is starting with a book that requires a glossary, a map, and a long patience buffer. Another mistake is starting with a classic that is famous for difficulty rather than for readability. Even within the books in this video, you can make a wrong match. If you dislike competition narratives, do not force Ender's Game as your first pick. If you dislike absurd humor, do not force The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy first, even if people quote it often. If you want plot-driven propulsion, do not start with Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep, because its pleasure is mood and ideas. If you find older prose frustrating, do not start with The Time Machine. Begin with one of the modern clear voice options, and come back later. A calm way to expand your tolerance is to alternate. Read a modern page-turner, then read a short classic, then read a humorous book. This rotation lets you explore without getting stuck. The goal is not to prove you are a sci-fi reader. The goal is to find the lane that makes you want the next book. Format choices can make a beginner book feel twice as easy. If you struggle to sit still with print, try audiobook for the first entry, especially for The Martian or Old Man's War, because the straightforward voice carries well. If you read before bed, ebook can help because you can control font size and reduce fatigue. If you want to slow down and notice ideas, print is often better for Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep and The Time Machine, because you can reread lines without losing your place. Another simple tip is to commit by time, not by pages. Tell yourself you will try 15 minutes a day for 1 week. That is enough to learn whether the tone is for you. Science fiction has a reputation for difficulty, but most difficulty is really just unfamiliar vocabulary plus long attention spans. These picks minimize both. They use either a modern plain voice, or a short length, or a comedic tone that removes pressure. Once you finish one, your next sci-fi choice becomes easier because your brain has a reference point for what a speculative setting feels like. Here is the simplest beginner plan. Choose one book from your lane and treat it as a sample, not a contract. If you want the safest adult entry, start with The Martian. If you want a fast story first bridge, start with Ender's Game. If you want humor that makes sci-fi feel friendly, start with The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. If you want a modern series taste without heavy lore, start with Old Man's War. If you want short, thoughtful, and a little darker in mood, start with Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep. If you want to understand the genre roots in a compact form, start with The Time Machine. After you finish, do one of two things. Either read another book in the same lane to build momentum, or switch lanes to build range. Both paths work. If you are still unsure, choose the book that matches your attention span today, not the version of you that has unlimited time. A short book finished is a better gateway than a long book abandoned. What matters is that your first pick makes you curious, rather than exhausted. I will list all 6 ISBNs in the description for easy copying, and you can reuse this map anytime you want a clean entry into science fiction.